Imagine you are sitting in a dimly lit classic American diner. The neon sign hums overhead, and the smell of sizzling beef fills the air. The waiter slides a plate of golden salt-crusted fries in front of you, and your hand instinctively reaches for that iconic glass bottle. You give it a firm tap on the 57 label, and a thick, vibrant red ribbons of sauce cascade onto your plate. It is the ultimate culinary baseline, the most predictable flavor in the world. It is sweet, it is vinegary, and it is the very definition of normal. But if you could pull back the curtain of time and trace the DNA of that red blob back to its ancestors, you wouldn't find a farm in Ohio or a vine-ripened tomato. You would find yourself on a humid dock in 17th century southern China, surrounded by the pungent, salty stench of rotting fish. The liquid you call ketchup is a massive historical lie, a culinary shapeshifter that spent most of its life as a translucent, funky juice made from fermented entrails. For over 1,000 years, the idea of putting a tomato in ketchup would have been seen as an act of insanity, or perhaps a suicide attempt. The story of how a byproduct of the fish trade became a sugary American staple is a journey of accidental substitutions and a desperate fear of poison. To understand why your fries taste the way they do, we have to look at the Hokkien Chinese word kê-tsiap. In the 1600s, this wasn't a thick paste. It was a dark, thin brine created by packing silver-scaled fish and shellfish into wooden vats with layers of salt. Under the weight of stones, the enzymes in the fish guts would slowly liquefy the meat, creating a liquid rich in amino acids, pure, unadulterated umami. This was the original ketchup, a cousin to the modern Southeast Asian fish sauces like nuoc mam or nam pla. It was a functional necessity for sailors and traders, because it was a shelf-stable salt bomb that could make even the most maggot-ridden ship biscuit taste like a savory feast. When British merchant sailors first encountered this ketchup in the ports of Malacca and Sumatra, their bland, boiled meat palates were electrified. They bought up crates of the stuff to bring back to the gray, rainy streets of London, where it became an overnight sensation among the elite. However, a massive logistical problem soon emerged. Shipping fermented fish juice halfway around the globe was expensive, slow, and prone to spoilage in the tropical heat. By the time the 1700s rolled around, the British were obsessed with the flavor of ketchup, but couldn't afford the authentic Chinese import. This sparked an era of wild culinary improvisation that would baffle a modern diner. British cookbooks from the 18th century are filled with ketchup recipes that contain absolutely zero tomatoes. Instead, they used whatever local ingredients could mimic that deep, savory funk. There was mushroom ketchup, made by salting piles of fungi until they bled a dark liquor. There was walnut ketchup, made by crushing green, unripened nuts. There were versions made from oysters, anchovies, and even elderberries. These were thin, spiced liquids meant to be stirred into gravies, not dipped into. They were attempts to hack the human tongue's craving for umami, using the forest floors of England instead of the South China Sea. The tomato, the ingredient we now consider the soul of ketchup, was actually the very last thing to join the party, and it had a terrifying reputation to overcome. When the Spanish brought tomatoes back from the New World to Europe, they were largely regarded as the devil's fruit. Because they belonged to the Solanaceae family, the same family as the lethal deadly nightshade, most Europeans believed that eating a tomato meant certain death. They were grown in gardens as ornamental love apples, admired for their beauty, but feared for their flesh. It wasn't until the early 1800s in the United States that this poison began to lose its stigma. In 1812, a Philadelphia scientist named James Mees published the first known recipe for tomato ketchup. He loved the acidity of the fruit, but following the tradition of the time, he still thought of ketchup as a salty, spiced condiment. His recipe involved brandy and spices, but lacked the one thing that defines the modern experience: sugar. Early tomato ketchup was a culinary disaster waiting to happen. Because tomatoes are low in natural preservatives compared to fermented fish or salted mushrooms, these early batches would ferment and explode in their bottles, or worse, develop deadly molds. To combat this, 19th century food producers turned to horrifying chemistry. To keep the sauce looking red and staying fresh, they pumped it full of coal tar for color and sodium benzoate for preservation. The ketchup of the mid-1800s was often a toxic slurry that tasted more like a pharmacy than a farm. This is where the story takes a turn toward a man who would change the global palate forever. Henry Heinz didn't just want to sell sauce. He wanted to solve the problem of purity. In 1876, he launched a version of tomato ketchup that leaned heavily on two things: high-quality ripe tomatoes and a massive increase in distilled vinegar. Heinz realized that if you increased the acidity and the sugar content, you didn't need coal tar or chemicals to keep the sauce shelf stable. He began using clear glass bottles specifically so customers could see that his sauce wasn't a muddy brown mess of preservatives, but a bright, clean red. He replaced the fermented funk of the ancient world with a precise balance of sweet and sour. Over the next few decades, the American palate shifted. We moved away from the complex, savory depths of mushroom and fish ketchups and toward this bright, high fructose profile. By the time the 20th century arrived, the word ketchup no longer meant a category of fermented sauces. It meant this one specific, thick, tomato-based product. We had successfully replaced a 1,000-year-old Asian tradition with a new world fruit, stabilized by industrial processing. If you look at a modern bottle of ketchup today, the process is a masterpiece of food engineering designed to hit every single one of your taste receptors simultaneously. It starts with tomato concentrate, which is essentially tomatoes that have been cooked down until their cell walls collapse, releasing a flood of natural glutamate. Then comes the vinegar for the tang, the salt for the bite, and the spices, usually a guarded secret of onion powder, celery salt, and clove for the aroma. The real heavy lifter is the sugar. Modern ketchup is roughly 20% sugar by weight. When you squeeze that bottle, you are essentially pouring a savory tomato caramel onto your food. The reason it is so hard to get out of the glass bottle is due to its non-Newtonian property. It is a thixotropic fluid that stays thick when still but turns liquid under the force of a shake. It is a highly calibrated scientific evolution of a sauce that used to be made in a wooden bucket of guts. The irony of the modern food world is that we have now come full circle. Today, foodie culture is obsessed with the very things that 19th century Americans tried to strip away from ketchup. We seek out high-end fish sauces, we experiment with fermented black garlic, and we crave the complex funk of the original Chinese kê-tsiap. Chefs in Michelin-starred restaurants often add a few drops of anchovy essence or fish sauce to their tomato sauces to brighten them, unconsciously recreating the exact flavor profile that British sailors fell in love with 400 years ago. They are rediscovering that the tomato and the fish gut are actually best friends. We spent centuries trying to refine the weirdness out of ketchup, only to realize that the weirdness was the secret all along. So the next time you're at that diner and you see that puddle of red on your plate, take a second to really look at it. You aren't just looking at a condiment, you're looking at a map of global trade, a history of medical paranoia, and a miracle of Victorian marketing. You're tasting the echoes of Chinese fishermen, British spice hunters, and American industrialists. It's a sauce that survived by changing everything about itself, its ingredients, its texture, and its color, while stubbornly holding on to a name it hasn't truly earned in 3 centuries. It's the most successful identity theft in culinary history. That is the process of how we eat. We take the world, we ferment it, we sweeten it, and eventually, we make it feel like home. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of your pantry, let us know what everyday object we should strip down next. Until then, keep questioning what's on your plate and trust the process.